Well, I want to go ahead and get started because I am known to always go over my time, and I want to make sure that I have enough time to have a conversation, have an open conversation, and field questions, and we can debate and chat about solidarity-driven co-design. What does that mean? This is about parent engagement, parent involvement, and how are we as leaders making room or creating spaces for our families, our marginalized communities, those that are furthest away from educational justice. How are we making room and spaces for them to be involved in the decision-making process at each one of our schools, contexts, districts, or organizations? I'm just gonna go ahead and get started, and we'll go through. So for today's, I wouldn't even say it's a presentation. It's more of a conversation, a discussion. I want to make sure that we're participating in an honest, transparent conversation about parent involvement or parent engagement in our systems and contexts. What does that look like? What does it mean for us as educators, as leaders, as community members, as parents of students that are in the system? How are we leveraging the information, the knowledge, the wisdom of our families, and how are we using that wisdom, that knowledge in our decision making? I also want to talk about how we can highlight the expertise, knowledge, cultural practices, and organized power of non-dominant families to construct more equitable systems. And just want to disclose, non-dominant does not mean I don't want to take power away from families. It just means that those families are not as prevalent in terms of numbers as other folks, especially when we're talking about race. We want to make sure that we are including families of color and people of color, people who are learning English, families who have students that are receiving special education services, etc. And lastly, I'd like to provide some guiding principles and recommendations to engage our families in systemic transformation toward equity. And if you have been around education for a while, and if you're new, you know that there needs to be a reimagination, a restructuring of our system, because our system was not meant for students of color, was not meant for students receiving special education services, was not meant for English language learners. And at the beginning, it was not meant for women. So just want to make sure that we are providing some sort of principles, sharing some stories about what work has been done in my particular context, and the struggles, the success, the joys, and the lessons learned from that work. If you guys at any time have any questions, please feel free. You could type in the chat. I don't know if you guys are able to use your mics. If you have a question, you can also jump in at any time. Do not mind at all. I want to start off with this quote. People, families, organizations, and marginalized communities struggle every day. It is a way of life that is necessary for survival, and when theorized and mobilized, can become a powerful strategy for transformation. Again, how do we use and leverage that wisdom, the experiences of our communities, our people, and how do we find a place for that knowledge, that useful knowledge, in our school systems? Because currently we really do not have a place for that wisdom, that knowledge. It is taken for granted. It is diminished, and at times it is weaponized against people of color. If you have the opportunity, I am doing a plug-in for Dr. Ann Ishimaro, who is at the University of Washington. If you have the opportunity, please, I would highly recommend for you to get this book here, Just Schools, Building Equitable Collaborations with Families and Communities. The bulk of the information that I will be sharing with you today comes directly from the book and from the class or the courses that I just went through at the University of Washington. And I had the pleasure of being in Dr. Ishimaru's class. Everything that we will talk about either comes directly from the book or stems from the ideas on the book. And I want to ask a question, if you guys can type in the chat. What does family engagement mean to you? What does it mean to us? And what does it look like in your setting? We know and understand that there's a plethora of research about the positive impacts of parent engagement and involvement in schools. So if the research is so compelling, why aren't we involving parents in realizing educational justice for all students? So I see in the chat, trust access. Can't have parent engagement. You can't be in with parents if they don't trust you, right? Jaime says it starts with relationship building. Absolutely true. Monica, family engagement means that there is an open channel, not open or closed in response to a problem. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Making space for families and their voices. Absolutely. The things we're typing in the chat, we know these things to be true, right? And I go back to the question that I posed. If we know about the positive impacts of engagement and involvement in our schools, why is it so hard for us as system leaders, as educators, to do so, collectively in a systemic way? Because I don't doubt that there are pockets of excellence within our educational setting where we are doing this consistently, and when we're doing this efficiently, when we're doing this productively. But systemically, we just can't seem to crack that nut. And I want to know, why is it so hard? What are some ideas as to why is it so difficult for us to do so? If you have ever tried to resolve or revise or dispute a decision in schools as a parent, a family member, a community advocate, or a student, your experience likely suggests that it's not that simple, right? Because again, the system is perfectly designed to get the results that it is getting. Today, we want to talk about what are some things that we can do as educators, as leaders, as community members, to begin at least having conversations about authentic family engagement in our schools and our settings. Chat, just want to check in on the chat. Two-way information sharing and gathering, partnerships with parents to support learning. The Walk Kids program of meeting each family individually for K-Kids could really help all grade levels. I agree. Those family connection meetings at the beginning are crucial. I would argue that needs to be something systemic. It needs to be something more frequent than just once at the beginning. It needs to be scheduled into our calendar as a school system. As a school leader, I need to create spaces for my families and our teachers to come together and talk about their students. Family engagement equals partnership in the student success process. Unfortunately, it feels as if schools and districts choose to try and get things started or up and running or looking good before inviting families along. I agree, Tomasina. I really, really agree with that. And we're going to be really discussing how do we get past that initial and at times insurmountable hurdle for our communities and our families. Another quote here. Educators can make imagined possibilities of equity a reality, but they can only do so with a different understanding of the power relationships between parents and schools. In the chat, people mentioned that we need to invite our families. We need to get to know our families. We need to create relationships with our families before we even start asking questions about school improvement plans, about systemic goals, because we are doing the work for them, which that is what we need to do, but they need to be at the table, right? We have to create with them and not necessarily just for them. Tony Ruiz, this is an excellent and beautiful segue into what we're going to talk about next. In the chat, it states, we constantly try to get parent involvement, but many parents feel like they don't have anything to contribute. This might be from little education themselves or just a fear of the school system in itself. And that is so, so true. I love the word, Monica, I love the word messy in your comment there. So I want to talk about the difference between a conventional partnership versus equitable collaborations, which is what we want to strive for. What does it mean for parents to be involved? Like, what comes to mind when parents are involved? You foresee parents, or you see parents coming into the school, asking questions, being on top of the academic programs and curriculum for their students. When students have issues, they are able to communicate and have direct access to teachers. If parents want to have a meeting or want to discuss something with teachers, those meetings happen in a timely manner. Is that what comes to mind, or what you guys think about when we define an involved parent? I have another one. Can parents be involved too much? And then what plug-in activities are we currently using in our schools? And by plug-in activities, Dr. Sue's Week, right? Math Roundup, Trunk or Treat, Christmas Play. These are events that definitely help, right, with the climate of the school, and at times with the culture of the school. But these are events that we are planning for our students and families, and not necessarily with. I am in a school, 100% free and reduced lunch, 92% Latino, 76% English language learner. Our Trunk or Treat, my first year as a first-year principal 3 years ago, very, very well attended, huge success, I would say. But then parents started coming up to me and said, hey, why do we, I get it, like, that's for the kids, we support what you guys are doing, but couldn't we do something else? Like, couldn't we do something that's a little bit more cultural, like appropriate or relevant? And these are folks, again, I'm surrounded by apartment buildings. The vast majority of my students and parents are Spanish speaking, Latino. So we started thinking about what other activities or events they would like to see. And out of those conversations, and we really started developing a system of collaboration, of communication, of working towards not just creating events, but creating a system that is responsive to the needs and wants and dreams of our community. Let's see what the chat here says. Yes, we need to be aware of the perceived power differential. We're going to talk about positionality and how that dominates, and that is a positive and a negative in our system. Some parents dominate spaces and need to be encouraged to also listen and be moderated for airtime as needed. I agree. I think it depends on the family situation. School hours are not conductive for a lot of parent work. Rebecca, that is absolutely, absolutely key. I'm gonna tell you a little story. Again, this is my third year as an elementary principal. When I started, we have an existing parent structure called ATP, Action Team for Partnerships. Our ATP team gets together, creates the events, schedules the events, calendars the events out for the year, and then we carry out those events as a school. Most of the events when I came in were happening, 30 minutes after school got out, 3:30, 4 o'clock. Well, we live in a highly agricultural area. There's agriculture all over the place here. And we have harvest that runs until November. The apple harvest is huge and it runs till November. A lot of these events were happening at 3 o'clock. We were getting maybe 2 parents the first couple of months because obviously everybody was working, and you're not going to stop putting money on the table to come in and do a science fair. It's not that folks don't want to, it's that you have to make a choice whether you get the extra dollars that you need or you go and see your kid's science fair. What we decided to do is we restructured our Action Team Partnerships, our ATP committee. We revamped the hours of operation for that team. We flexed their schedule. We, instead of meeting at 4 o'clock, we met at 6:30. In the winter, we met, in the spring, we met at 5:30. The hours were different. The commitment from the team members were different. The commitment from leadership was different because we wanted to make sure that we accommodated to the schedule of our community and our families and not necessarily to ours. Now, there are some professional and personal implications with that shift because I also have a family. Teachers also have a family. We need to take care of ourselves and our families first before we can take care of our families in the schools. So we had to negotiate, and there was a lot of tension at the beginning. There was some choice words being directed at the principal of the school at first because people were not happy with that. People were not participating. We had a ton of parents. Our attendance improved from parents in the single digits to having 30, 40, 50 people attend. And when you have, on average, 30 people attend your Spanish parent meetings, something is being done right. The only thing we changed at the beginning was we changed the hour when we met. That was it. That was a shift, a structural change that we made so that we can accommodate. Accommodating to their schedule was the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did is we talked about our ATP committee members held the meetings in English in a school where almost 80% of our families are English language learners. So we also had to change that. Our meetings shifted from being in English to also being in Spanish. We had ATP committee members who delivered the information in English for English-speaking parents, and then I delivered the information for Spanish-speaking families in a different location. With Zoom, we were able to create breakout rooms, and we had English and Spanish. We planned those things together, but our attendance improved tremendously as well because now we took away that obstacle of the language. I want to talk about Codesign and what is Codesign. And before we get to that co-designing piece, I want to talk about just the difference between conventional partnerships and equitable collaborations. On page 50 of Just Schools by Dr. Anishimaro, it gives you a nice little table. And I want to focus over the next 30 minutes, I really want to focus on these 4 themes or topics: the roles, the goals, the strategies, and the actual change process, what that entails when we talk about conventional partnerships and moving towards equitable collaborations. So I'll go over the first 2. In a conventional partnership, our non-dominant families and parents are seen as clients and beneficiaries. In equitable collaborations, non-dominant parents and families are seen as educational leaders who contribute and help shape the agenda. And this is not necessarily a shift for us as people in the system. This is the biggest shift that we have to make within our families and our communities. Somebody in the chat mentioned that there was apprehension from the parents. Tony mentioned that, parents feel like they don't have anything to contribute. And this might be from little education themselves or just a fear of the school system. This is the biggest shift, and this is what takes the longest time. Getting families, getting parents to believe that they are educational leaders, that they have things to contribute to our educational setting. Because for too long, we have dismissed that knowledge, that wisdom, that expertise as not being important in an academic realm, in an academic setting. So we have to backtrack, and we have to undo years of negative interactions, negative stereotyping from schools towards our families. And that just doesn't happen overnight. The goals are also different. Individual remediation in a conventional partnership. Individual remediation aims within a culture of denial or implicit blame. Well, if those parents would just show a little bit more interest, if they would show up to the meetings, if they would come to conferences, if they would make their students be responsible at home, if they would teach some manners at home, if they would just care, right? If they would just answer my emails, if they would check their Class Dojo messages or Remind app or whatever message system you use. And then from the parent standpoint, well, I call the teacher and they never answer my email. They never answer my phone call. Every time I call the school, I get a machine. I can never get a hold of anybody. When I show up, nobody speaks Spanish. Nobody speaks the language. Nobody's able to help me. Again, there's a lot of finger pointing in a conventional partnership, which if that continues and goes on, the chances of you truly, authentically collaborating to change the system diminish exponentially because there's no trust. There's no sense of community. There's no sense of let's do this, let's work together for the benefit and the betterment of our students and our school system. In an equitable collaboration, equitable systemic change within a culture of shared responsibility. I'm not just talking about my kid, I'm talking about our kids, all of our kids. If my kid is successful, it is because you and I, teachers and families, are working together. If my kid is not being successful, both of us have to put in. We can't just go halfway. We can't just expect one side to do all the work while the other kind of sits back and relaxes. We both have to care. How do you make that cultural shift in the community? That cultural shift only happens, again, it takes a while because the first thing you have to break down is that barrier and that fear and that mistrust of the school system and the school setting. For far too long, people of color, we've been done wrong by educational systems. So you have to regain the trust of the community. And it really depends on your context. I am lucky enough that I am in this community. I grew up here. I grew up 2 blocks down from the school that I work in. I know the families. I speak the language. So it was easy. It's easy for me to to start shifting that culture because I was visible. I went out. I met with folks, right? They kind of knew who I was. And even then, even they knew who I was. I spoke the language. They were still apprehensive about showing up. They showed up, but they didn't really fully participate. They didn't really fully engage. Unfortunately, that just takes time and consistency. Your message has to be the same. Your message has to be consistent. Your message has to be authentic, and you have to be visible. You have to know where the apartment buildings are. You have to know where your kids come from. You have to know what route they take to school, where they walk to school, what parks they like to go hang out with. You have to know the names of the parents. And you sure as heck have to know the names of the students. Again, it starts with being visible, with being consistent, building relationships. And that cultural shift does not happen overnight. It's a long, slow process. And that's the problem with co-designing is that as systems leaders, as educators, we are results driven. We want to see results. We want to see a change in outcomes from, one unit to the next, from one formative assessment to the next. That's our business, right? We want immediate results. Immediate results when you're dealing with changing the dynamics of communities and families, especially marginalized communities. That takes a lot of time because it takes a lot of time for marginalized communities and communities of color and English-speaking communities to really trust leadership, to really trust teachers. Rebecca, I hear what you're saying about the struggle within the equity work. What we did at Rubber Frost is we have our PTA, PTO, or ATP, or whatever parent structure that you currently have. We have that for open to anybody. Anybody can join. We also designed a specific space for our families, our English language learning families, to come in and really talk about equity work and really talk about the issues on the school separately. Now that group has a representative, has a team of representatives that show up to ATP and PTO and PTA, but they have in mind and they carry with them the interests of our Spanish-speaking community, because there are some things that we can talk about openly and honestly within our community that wouldn't be appropriate to do so in a large school general setting. I'm not trying to dodge those loud voices. I am just trying to make sure that I am protecting my families, my marginalized families, my people of color from those loud voices. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to nurture and protect people that want to be involved in the decision-making process. And then from that little group, I'm going to select those folks that are willing to stand up, that are willing to help me fight, if you will, those negative connotations and, debate and discuss the equity work that needs to happen and the shift in dynamics that needs to occur in our systems. Okay. This is my last quote, and this one is very, very meaningful to me. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. Again, we are trying to change the system. We are trying to really close that educational gap that achievement gap. We're doing all these things. We're buying programs. We're having PLTs. We're trying to become a professional learning community. We're looking at formative assessments. We're looking at data. And I think we are forgetting one of the most essential ingredients in that mix is we're not asking parents. We're not asking students. How can we improve outcomes for them? We are making the assumptions that we know what is best for each one of our students. We are making the assumptions that our knowledge is bigger, better than the knowledge of our families. And I think that's what we must try to kind of shift. So what is co-design? So co-design is, in very essence, is you're trying to make room at the table for folks that don't normally have or are being invited to a table. It is a collaborative, iterative, authentic, and messy process for both educators and families. And I underlined the word messy there. Because if you're expecting to have a couple of meetings, create an agenda, have some goals, have a 1-year plan or a 6-month plan or a 45-day plan, collect data on the initiatives that you're making, revise your work, implement the work, collect more data, streamline the work. That doesn't happen. This is a messy, messy process. I'm gonna give you another story. Last year, at the beginning of the school year with COVID, we started the year full on remote learning. It was difficult. Hard for everybody. We had issues with technology. We had issues with Wi-Fi. There was it was a can of worms. Our parents, in about October, we had a parent meeting, a Spanish parent meeting, and they came up and said, hey, we don't know what is happening with our kids. Like, there is no communication between our teachers, our distance learning teachers, and like us. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what's happening. Like, I'm at work. I leave them at school, and they're on the computer, and then we don't know. How do we communicate with our teachers? How do we know what our kids are doing, how they're doing? So we really started working on creating a plan, a protocol, and resources to share with our teachers. What we did is we said, okay, what are some things that you guys want to see? Parents worked for a couple of months on creating a survey, creating a progress report that could be mailed or sent out electronically to our parents. We included it in Class Dojo. We had we parents did a lot of work to make it easier for teachers. You know what I did? After a couple of months, I took all the information, all the work that the parents had done. They said, okay, we're ready. Take that back. Take it back to your leadership team, to your guiding coalition. Take it back to your staff, vote on it, and then let us know. So what did I do? I did what they told me to do. I took back all that information, took back all that work, presented to our leadership team, had a Wednesday early release PD exactly on that. And I shared that work with Dr. Annie Shimaro, and I thought, you know what, we're making headway here. We're really doing some good work. And she stopped me dead in my tracks and she said, Omar, you're doing exactly the same thing that always has been done. You're taking the work that has been done by the families, and then now you're sharing it, and now you're going to get feedback from your teachers, and now you're going to go back and share that feedback with the families, and then they're going to talk about it, discuss it. They're going to give their counter proposal. You're going to take that counter proposal back to the staff. See what I mean? She said, how about you just get rid of the middleman? And I said, well, I'm the middleman. How are you going to get rid of me? She said, that's exactly what needs to happen. Remember, this is not about you. This is not about your effort. This is about a collaborative, solidarity-driven effort. Both educators and families have to be together when you're talking about the progress report, the format, what information is needed. How are you going to send that out? Who's going to create the poll? What if parents don't have access to internet? What if they don't have a smartphone? What if they can't get the survey online? How are you going to respond to that? Educators, some of their questions were, well, you're asking me that I have to answer phone calls or texts after contracted hours. That's a no-no. We're not doing that. But again, those conversations should be had in a space where educators and families are together and we're discussing those things, right? We're not saying we're not going to do it. Educators have a valid point that, hey, if it's 7 o'clock and you get off work and you're expecting me to answer your phone call, I'm with my family. But educators, human beings, people have to be able to have a conversation about that. Our families will be understanding. And when we got together, our families were understanding of some of those issues, right? So then we had to compromise. That, in essence, is co-design. But it took us about 3 months to finally get to a spot where we said, okay, we know exactly what we want to do. We know exactly how we want to address the communication issue or the breakdown in communication. Now let's go implement it. It took us 3 months to figure out how we wanted to do it. It's taken us another year to really carry on that actual process. And we're still tweaking it. We're still revising it. We're still editing. And we're just trying to make it better and improve. Also want to highlight that non-dominant families and communities are critical actors in educational leadership for educational justice. They are our best source of information on their students. Somebody in one of our courses, we invited parents to come in and share with us, and a parent said, hey man, you guys may have a doctorate in education, but we have PhDs on our kids. And nobody's asking us about our kids. Nobody's asking us about what currency should be used with my student. I know these things. Yet that information is never shared or it's never asked. And when teachers want to share that information, they are dismissed. Again, I stress this out at the beginning. We want to plan and create with families and communities and not for them. As teachers, we know how important that is in a classroom, right? Students need to have ownership of those assessments, of those work projects. If there is no buy-in as a leader, if there is no buy-in and staff members don't feel like they had a input in the decision or an initiative at the school, it's not going to gain traction. I'm going to struggle to implement. It's the same thing with our families. We want to make sure that we're planning and creating with and not for them. And you want to create spaces for marginalized communities to play key roles in the decision-making process. Again, I took an existing structure that is a district initiative, ATP. I transformed my ATP into a space for not only English-speaking families, Spanish-speaking families, right? But I made it into a space for all families. And that took some time, commitment, money, resources, planning, because I had to get people to translate. I had to get folks that wanted to come and lead some of those meetings because it shouldn't always be me. And then I had to invest time and effort in building capacity of parent leadership. Identify who the leaders were, start building capacity, and then slowly let them take over. Again, I want to highlight this book. These are 4 key principles of co-design that come directly from the book. And we're going to briefly talk about these 4. You want to begin with family and community priorities, interests, concerns, knowledge, and resources. Number 2, you want to transform power. Number 3, you want to build reciprocity and agency. And number 4, You want to undertake change as a collective inquiry. So these are the 4 principles. If you really want to talk, if you really want to start changing, reimagining parent engagement, this is a good space to start. Okay, with these 4 principles. Okay, so the first one, begin with family and community priorities. So number 1, you have to know your partners. You have to know your families. And that depends on the context, on your community. You know, do most of them speak English? Are most of them refugees? Do you have a large influx of African refugees in your community? We have a neighborhood within our district that is, we are struggling to get parents in. We found a community advocate who is a refugee himself, who is helping us recruit and is helping us deliver the message. So you have to know your context, you have to know your families, and leadership has to be visible. I cannot stress this enough. We cannot leave parent engagement and parent involvement to our parent engagement committee or to the teacher that has always done the events. Leaders, you want to make a dent, you have to be visible. We have to be visible. I mentioned this earlier. You have to know the names of the families, the names of the mothers and the fathers and the aunties and the grandmas that come and drop off kids. You have to know who they are by name. And you better know the names of their children. I engage in community walks. I love doing community walks. School is out. Kids are walking home. Twice a week, I walk with students and I go in a different direction and I just walk. These are highly effective for me in the winter, and they're highly effective for me in the summer. When I just go into the apartment buildings and I just, go and say hi. Hey, please remember, like right now, hey, please remember, we are registering kinders. We have early start kinder next week. And I know you have a kinder student that is not registered yet. Please do so. If you need help with that, we are in the office. We can help you out. But again, your visibility matters. The fact that you're around the neighborhood, it matters. You have to initiate and nurture relationships. You have to modify your existing structures. Every school, I believe, it is my hope, let me just say, it is my hope that every school currently has some sort of parent involvement engagement component. Use that. Start with that. Figure out who your clientele is. Figure out who in the staff can actually communicate with the families, who has the passion for that work. And then you have to walk right alongside them. You can't just hand it off to them. You have to invite parents to be co-designers rather than research subjects or informants. That is key. And somebody mentioned, about that cultural shift in the community. This is huge. Again, it starts with authenticity, transparency, visibility. You have to build that trust. And you have to position parents as key decision makers. Last, and I think most importantly, you have to be intentional. When we're canvassing your neighborhood, when you're looking at parents, when you're looking at who can help you start this movement, be intentional. Which parents? Which are the parents that you're going to rely on? Who are you going to ask to help? How is the agenda determined? Do you even have an agenda? We are at a point here at Robert Frost Elementary where we don't have an agenda for our parent meetings. We never follow it anyways because other things come up. So the parents themselves decided, you're just wasting paper, man. Like, don't even give us an agenda. Don't even print it out. Let's just, and that is hard for me as a leader because I like to have documentation of what happens, right? For my title, I'm a Title I school, so I need to have some things. So I still have them for my documentation purposes, for the actual systemic purpose. But our parents themselves says, hey, we're going to talk, when we get here, we're going to tell you what we want to talk about. We are going to figure out, we're going to decide what happens in the meeting. Okay? And then the last thing is, how do you leverage familial expertise to reach your desired outcome and foster solidarities? Again, we created a parent university. We called it a Robert Frost Parent University. When at first we started building capacity, we started sharing resources with parents. And after a year, we identified parents that wanted to continue with that parent university. So it's almost like an induction program, like a year program. So we have now, this year, we're going to have our junior class. Our junior class is now helping us teach our freshman class, our incoming class of parents. How about pickup and drop off procedures? How about lunch? What do you do when, how do you communicate with the office? How do you communicate with your teachers? What are the protocols for snow days, for no school days? Who do you communicate with when your child is sick with COVID? How do you fill out the attestation form? Like all those things that parents have experience doing, they are now teaching other parents about those protocols. Now those parents that are the juniors feel like they are contributing, feel like they are leaders, and our freshman parents, our incoming kinder parents, or anybody who is new, feel like now they have somebody other than administration or the teacher that they can rely on for school information. That's how you begin with family and community priorities, interests, concerns, knowledge, and you want to leverage those resources. Second principle, the transformation of power. And this has been the most difficult for me. I am constantly working on the transformation of power, and especially the first bullet there, beware of positionality. Like I mentioned before, I am from the community. I grew up here. I know a lot of the families and a lot of the students from my 20 years of working in the Pasco School District. That is a great position to be in, right? You have intimate knowledge, you have solid relationships, but it also brings some negative aspects, because now people are expecting you to be the fixer. People are expecting you to be the one that engages in the debate and conversation on behalf of the parents themselves, which I don't mind doing, but at some point we need to invite the parents to also start taking the reins and having those conversations themselves. I walk into the room, I have to be aware, I have to check my position at the door. I remind parents, hey, I am a community member. I am here to support in anything that you do. I am not here to lead the meeting. I am not here to set the agenda. I am here to listen. I am here to learn. And I am here to offer feedback. And by all means, if you see that I am doing something that needs to be revised or needs to be brought up to my attention, please do so. But again, it has taken me 3 years to get to this point. I start every year, and our parent leads start every meeting with asking the following 2 questions. What are the hopes and dreams for your children? And what do you want the system to look like in 10 years? That is our premise. That is our bedrock. We ask that at every meeting, at every planning meeting we ask, at every general parent meeting we ask. What are the hopes and dreams for your children? Please don't forget. Remember, this is about the hopes and dreams of your kids. We want to make sure that we transform the system for your kids and your future generations. And then we look at the long term, that we know this game is played in the long term, right? What do you want the system to look like in 10 years? So if we do what we need to do now, what will the system look like when your child is in high school? Your child is in kindergarten right now. What will it look like when your child gets to 12th grade. What do you hope for that for your kid? It's amazing how attitudes change when you pose these two questions, right? All the love, the passion, the concern comes out. And again, we want to leverage that. We want to use that ferocity. We want to use those, that motherly instinct. You want to protect your kids. You want the best for your kids. Heck, some of us came from different countries because we wanted to give our kids an opportunity, right? We leverage that. We work together. We share our stories. We provide resources. We provide support. Because it's for our kids. This is for all of us. Again, go back and you design, plan, and execute with families and not for. That is huge. You want to identify leaders and leadership within your school community. And I see something here in the chat that I just want to jump in. From Rebecca, we've heard a lot about not asking for free emotional labor. How do you balance this? Yep, free emotional labor. That is key. I think for us, the way that we have leveraged that is this is about your most valuable treasure. This is about your most valuable earthly possession. For me, it's about my baby girl. My baby girl starts kindergarten. For teachers, as a parent, I think that's an easy leverage. I think you say, you know what, this is for your kid. What do you hope and dream for your kid? Again, that simple question really changes the dynamics and changes the way that people look at the work, if you want to call it that, the work. For parents, for teachers, we really talk about you want the best for your kid, right? You want the best for your kid. If your kid was having issues, you'd go and ask. If your kid is being bullied, you'd go and advocate. If your kid is failing a class, you go and figure out why. You ask questions, right? You demand answers. So why is it not the same for our kids? We want to treat our students, and I know this is, utopian and cliche, but we want to treat our students like if they were our own kids. And that is a transformation. That is something that happens with time and over time. I guess I don't have a straight answer for you. This work is difficult work. We know that it's taxing on the soul. It's taxing on the body. It's physically, emotionally demanding. After last year, that was one of the hardest. That was the hardest year that I've ever been a part of. I've ever been involved in education. Physically, but more so emotionally and mentally. Anybody have any thoughts on the, not asking about free emotional labor? I'm just interested to see what we have here. You guys can put it in the chat. Another two things that I wanna touch base on the second principle is you want to create roles and responsibilities. You want to offer those to parents and don't assign. People will take them on when they're ready. Again, people will take them on when they're ready. The other premise is that we're not just training or fixing parents. And you want to repeat that over and over and over. This is not just about training parents. This is not about fixing parents. This is not about, and again, we're not training parents. We don't want to train you. We don't want to fix you. We want to provide resources. We want to work collaboratively. And you do not become the middle person. Like I shared in my story, do not become the middle person. Build reciprocity and agency. You want to start to identify a tool, a product, or a process, or a strategic action that requires the attention of both the families, the community, and the educators. Pick one. Right now in schools, after the last 2 years, year and a half that we've had, There are many things that we can be working on collaboratively. The actual process, the actual work process itself creates a shift from an individual parent agency to collective agency. We want to make sure that we are shifting and we're focusing on the success of all children, not just their individual kid. Parent and teacher co-designing new ways of interacting and collaborating. You want to leverage the individual expertise of participants. You want to disrupt institutional scripts. Somebody mentioned it, right? Like, I don't know how to read and write. Sir, we value that. We have resources, if you want, that we can share with you if you want to learn how to do those things. But you also have made it and survived without knowing how to do that, right? I want to know, like, if you're open, I want to know how you're doing that, right? The people that say that they don't know how to read and they don't know how to write, they have made it. I say that to people that immigrated from Mexico, right? They're like, I came from a little village in the south of Mexico. I don't know how to read or write. And I said, son, you made it all the way to the state of Washington without knowing how to read and write and without knowing the language. How did you do that? There has to be knowledge there, right? There has those experiences. I want to leverage this. I want to make sure that they understand and they know and they feel like their experiences and their knowledge and wisdom matters. Their experiences, their wisdom, and their knowledge matters. It matters to me, it matters to our teachers, it matters to our students. And you want to be vulnerable as a leader. If you have an opportunity, I would like to call your attention to this Family Leadership Design Collaborative and Co-Design. Google it. It talks about co-designing. It has a framework. It gives you resources to really start thinking about changing dynamics and parent engagement. The last principle is you undertake change as collective inquiry. It's almost like trying to become a professional learning community. We want to avoid weaponizing data. We don't want trauma on display. And then you want to engage in participatory design research, PDR practices. There's more information in that link. Lastly is, like, what is your current problem practice in your setting? How did you system decide the problem practice? Is there a theory of action? And if there is, who came up with it? If parents were not part of that, we need to go back and rethink our problem practice. It may very well be that it's the same thing. You guys both agreed that problem practice is common for both parents and teachers. Yes, the slide deck. So if you would email me or send me a text, I would get the slide deck and any resources that I have. We also have a state network for Spanish-speaking families called Familias Unidas del Estado de Washington. So if you need any more information on how do you get your Spanish-speaking families and communities engaged, please give me a call, send me an email. I am more than happy to share all of those resources with you. Like I said, I always, can you put that in the chat? The link isn't accessible on the screen. Oh, are you talking about the email? Yes. There is the email. Anything that you need, please let me know. Text, phone, I'm happy to provide and be of service. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for the work that you are doing and you will continue to do. Gracias.